Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Today I will talk about the development of the internal genital organs. Reproductive systems consist of the internal and the external sex organs which work together for the prepares of the sexual reproductions. And development of the reproductive systems organs beginning early stage in the embryo at the 7th week, and the development of the reproductive systems close link throughout with the development of the renal system. Genital systems. The chromosomes response of the key to the sexual dimorphism, the Y chromosomes. Y chromosomes contains the test determining factors, or is called the TGF, and also is called sex determining regions on Y, or is called SRYG. This gene on it short arm of the Y chromosomes, and the protein produce of this gene اللي هو يتمثل لي بالسكس determining regions on Y genes. Now beginning to the transcriptions factors to determining the part of the rudimentary sexual organs, and the sex determining regions on Y when the protein when the present is the testis determining factors. Now the male development occurs when the absent of the sex determining regions on Y protein is absent. The female development occurs. The male and the female reproductive systems composed of the gonads, ovaries or testes, genital duct systems composed of the mesonephric and paramesonephric duct, and the external genital. Now, initially, the gonads. Gonads composed of the two stages. First, the indifferent stage, and second, the different stages. First, the indifferent stage, the sex is determined at the time of the fertilizations. Okay. Then at the fertilizations, the sex is determined, and in the 7th week the gonad acquire a male or a female morphological. Okay, in the 7th week of the development, the gonad acquire male or female morphological, and initially these gonads appear as a pair of the longitudinal ridge, or is called the genital ridge or gonadal ridge. You can see this is the longitudinal ridge, genital ridge or gonadal ridge. These gonads formed by the proliferations of the epithelial and the condensations of the underlining of the mesenchyme. إذن هي اللي تكون forming by the epithelium and the mesenchyme, and the germ cells appear in the genital ridge at the 6 week of the development. إذن الجيرم cells تكون هي appear بالgenital ridge at the 6 weeks of the development. البريمورديال germ cells originated from the epiblast and migrate through to the primitive streak, and in the 3rd week these primordial germ week formed between the dorsal wall of the iliac sac. This is the iliac sac, and this is the dorsal wall of the endodermal of the iliac sac, and these close to the allantois. and بال4th week راح نلاحظ هذه الميجريت these primordial germ cells migrate by amoeboid movement along the dorsal mesentery of the hand gut and reach the gonad at the 5th week, and embedding in the gonad at the 6th week. Then here reach the gonad تكون بال 5th week, and embedding the gonad تكون بال 6th week. When the primordial germ cells, if they fail to reach the genital ridge, the gonad do not development. Okay? إذا صارت بها fail to reach to the genital ridge, the gonad do not development. And shortly before and during the arrival of the primordial germ cells راح نلاحظ انه الابثيليال of the genital ridge proliferated and penetrate للunderlining to the intermediate mesoderm and forming the primitive 6 cord. This is the primitive 6 cord. And these figures, you can see some of the primordial germ cells surrounded by the primitive 6 cord. The primordial germ cells and primitive 6 cord forming the indifferent gonad. These gonad which development into the testes or ovaries can occurs. Now, second stage of the gonad, the differentiated stage or gonad, refers to the male testis. If the embryo is genitally male, the primordial germ cells carry the XY 6 chromosomes complex. And under the influence of the sex determining regions on Y genes on the Y chromosomes, which encode the testis determining factors, the primordial 6 cord continues to proliferate and penetrating deeper into the medulla. احنا قلنا البريميتيف 6 cord اللي هي تكون forming from the epithelial proliferating of the epithelial of the genital cells and penetrating to the underlining the intermediate mesoderm forming to the primitive 6 cord. Now this primitive 6 cord continues to proliferate and penetrating deep into the medulla and forming to the testis cord or medullary cord. Toward the hilum of the gland, the cord, you can see here, these testis cord or medullary cord in the hilum break up into the network of the tiny cells strands that later give rise to the rich testis. You can see then نلاحظ انه toward the الهلم of the gland the cord break. You can see this is the break up into the network of the tiny cells strand and give rise to the rich tubules of the rich testis. And you can see this is the rich testis. And during the more development, dense layers, you can see this is the dense layers of the fibrous connective tissue, التونيكا البوجينيا. Okay, this is the التونيكا البوجينيا, and this is the التونيكا البوجينيا separated the testis cord from the surface epithelium. This is the surface epithelium, and the fibrous connective tissue التونيكا البوجينيا separated the cord, the testis cord, from the surface epithelium. In the fourth month, the testis cord become horseshoe. You can see this is the horseshoe shaped, and end points are continuous with rete testis. You can see this is the rete testis, and the end point of the testis cord connecting with rete testis cord. Now the testis cord is composed of the primitive germ cells and sustentacular cells of the sertoli. والسيرتوري هي derived from the surface epithelial of the genital ridge. Now, the mesoderm of the ridge give rise to interstitial cells, or is called the Leydig cells. Leydig cells lie in between to the cord. Okay, this is the cord. هي راح تكون between the cord and produce testosterone in the 8th week. In puberty, these cords acquire a lumen and become the seminiferous tubules. With seminiferous tubules are canalized and joint the rete testis. Okay, seminiferous tubules canalized, they join the rete testis tubules. Rete testis enter to the ductus efferent. You can see enter to the ductus efferent. Ductus efferent are remaining part of the excretory tubules of the mesonephric systems. This is the mesonephric systems or tubules. And rete testis and mesonephric duct or Wolfen duct, which become the ductus deferens or vas deferens. Okay, إذن راح نلاحظ هسه هنا rete testis enter to the remaining part of the excretory mesonephric tubules. that the ductally efferent rigidest and the mesonephric duct or Wolfen duct forming to the ductus different or vas different. Now, it differentiated gonad in the female ovary. In female embryos, the primordial germ cells carry the XX6 chromosomes and no Y chromosomes. The primitive 6 chord dissociated into the irregular cells. You can see irregular cells, clusters. These clusters containing to the group of the primary or primitive germ cells. These occupied the medulla part of the, you can see this is in the medulla of the ovary. And later they disappear and are replaced by vesicular stroma. You can see this is the vesicular stroma اللي هي that forming the ovarian medulla. This is the ovarian medulla replaced by the groups of the primitive germ cells in the medullary part of the ovary. The surface epithelial of the female gonad continuous to proliferate unlike that of the male. بالseventh week راح نلاحظ انه هذه الابثيليال proliferations and will give rise to the secondary generations of the cord. But the secondary generations of the cord is called the cortical cord. These cords تكون near to the surface. These cords penetrating the underlying mesenchymal but remain close to the surface. بالthird month راح نلاحظ انه these cords separated into the isolated cells clusters. These cells in the clusters continuous to proliferate and beginning to the surrounded each oogonium. This is the oogonium and surrounded by the cluster cells. These cells is called follicular cells. Together the oogonia and follicular cells constitute primary follicles. إذن بالthird month راح نلاحظ إنه هذه الكورد راح يصير بيها separated also into the cells clusters and forming the follicular cells. الfollicular cells تكون هي surrounded each oogonia واللي تكون هي derived from the germinal cells. Here in this figures show the together follicular cells and the oogonium forming or constitute the primary oocyte. Now the diaphragm show the influence primordial germ cells on the indifferent gonad. from the male and the female. Now in the male, containing to the 44 somatic cells plus XY, while in the female 44 plus XX. المال الواي influence الindifferent الgonide forming to the testes, while in the female absent of the Y, the indifferent gonide forming to the ovary. The testes forming to the medullary cord development from the primitive cord proliferate and forming to the medullary cord, while in the female the medullary cord degenerate from the cluster cells and these cells degenerate forming to the stroma, later forming to the vesicular of the medulla, ovarian medulla. In the male, no cortical cords, primitive cells or cords proliferate forming to the medullary cord, while in the female the primitive cords proliferate and forming to the secondary cords, or is called the cortical cords. In the testes have a thick tonic albuginea, while in the female no tonic albuginea. Now genital duct. First, in different stages. Initially, both the male and the female embryos have two pairs of duct lateral to the genital ridge. The first, mesonephric duct, or is called Wolfen duct. Wolfen duct plays an important part in the development of the male reproductive systems. Wolfen duct, important part of the development of the male reproductive systems. Second, paramesonephric or Mullerian duct. Mullerian duct have a leading role in the development of the female reproductive systems. إذن Mullerian duct هو يكون important in the development of the female reproductive systems, while Wolfen duct important part in the development of the male reproductive systems. Mesonephric duct arise as invaginations of the epithelial surface of the urogenital ridge. Cranially, the paramesonephric duct opening into the abdominal cavity with funnel-like structures. Caudally, the paramesonephric duct first run lateral to the mesonephric duct, then crosses its ventral to be middle to it. In the midline, the right and the left paramesonephric duct fuse to forming the uterine canal that project caudally into the wall of the urogenital sinuses, producing the paramesonephric or المولاريان tubercles. You can see اليوتراين produce to the paramezonefric tubercle or المولاريان tubercle. الميزونefric duct opening into the urogenital sinuses on the side of the المولاريان tubercle. Here you can see the paramezonefric duct lateral to the Wolfen duct, and in the middle, right and left of the Mullerian duct, fuse forming to the uterine canals that project caudally into the wall of the urogenital sinuses and produce the Mullerian tubercle. Right and left Mullerian duct fused forming to the uterine canal. Now a differentiated genital duct, first the male genital ducts. Caudally excretory tubules of the mesonephros will not disappear. You can see not disappear and forming the afferent ductally اللي هو يكون from the epigenital tubules. Afferent ductally connecting the erythritestis and vas deferens. Also, these tubules forming the vestigial of the paradidymis. Okay. Also, these tubules forming the paradidymis from the paragenital tubules. إذن عندنا afferent ductally from the epigenital tubules, while the paradidymis from the paragenital tubules. The cranial part of the mesonephric duct degenerations and forming vestigial of the appendix. You can see this is the appendix of the epididymis. Okay. إذن عندنا cranial part of the mesonephric duct راح يصير بها degenerations and forming vestigial of the appendix epididymis, while caudally excretory tubules of the mesonephros forming to the afferent ductally اللي هو يكون from من epigenital tubules, while these tubules also forming the vestigial of the paradidymis واللي هي تكون from the paragenital tubules. The remaining part of the mesonephric duct at the cranial part forming the duct of the epididymis. This is the epididymis, and this is the duct of the epididymis is called the duct deferens, or is called the ductus deferens, and the ejaculatory duct. إذن بالcranial part remaining مال الميزونفريك duct راح يعطينا ductus deferens and ejaculatory duct. زين راح نلاحظ انه اكو عندنا الاوت باد from the الميزونفريك duct، واللي تكون هي at the distal end of the vas deferens. You can see this is the seminal vesicles. Also here you can see this is the seminal vesicles that هي outbud from the mesonephric duct at the distal end of the vas deferens, or is called the ductus deferens. And the para mesonephric duct degenerations will يكون except for a small portions at their cranial ends, forming the appendix testis. This is the appendix testis. The cranial part of the mesonephric duct forming a ductus deferens and the ejaculatory duct, and the outbud from the mesonephric duct will تكون at the distal end of the vas deferens. This is the seminal vesicles. نلاحظ انه المنطقة من منطقة الباراميزونيفريك duct يصير بها degenerations ما عدا except for small portions at the cranial end forming to the appendix testis. Now the female genital duct. The paramesonephric duct is important to the forming the female genital duct. The paramesonephric duct develop into many genital duct in the female. Initially, the paramesonephric duct forming the three parts. يعني ما قدرت. Now the horizontal and the cranial part of the paramesonephric duct forming to the uterine tube, while the caudally fused forming to the uterus. After the duct fused in the midline forming the broad ligament. This is the broad ligament. And the fused of the paramesonephric duct give rise the هنا صارت عندنا الفيوز راح يعطينا الكوربس. This is the body of the uterus and forming the cervix of the uterus. إذن الفيوز منطقة الفيوزد of the paramesonephric duct، هذه المنطقة اللي اعطتنا بها اليوترس راح تعطينا give rise to the corpus, the body of the uterus and the cervix of the uterus. Also الميزنكايمال اللي تكون هي surrounded of the paramesonephric duct now forming to the muscular coat of the uterus. This is the muscular coat of the uterus, that the myometrium. Also and forming the peritoneal covering that the perimetrium. Okay. إذن إحنا عندنا الميزنكايمال اللي تكون surrounded paramesonephric duct راح تعطينا forming to the myometrium and the perimetrium, while منطقة من منطقة اللي تكون الفيوزد of the الcaudally part of the mesonephric duct of sorry الparamesonephric duct forming the uterus. After fused these ducts in the midline forming to the broad ligament. and منطقة ما منطقة هذه اللي هي تكون تتمثل الفيوزد of the الباراميزونيفريك duct from the caudally part forming to the corpus or body of the uterus. At the point of the paramesonephric tubercle that they produce from the uterine canal, you can see two sino-vaginal bulbs grow from the pelvic part of the urogenital sinuses and forming to the vaginal plate. This plate is increased in size and canalized in the 5th month, forming the vagina. The vagina has a dual organs or double organs. The upper part of the vagina near the uterus that called the pharynx. The pharynx derived from the uterine canal. The uterine canals form from the fused from the two parts of the paramesonephric duct, left and right, forming to the uterine canals. The lower part of the vagina derived from the urogenital sinuses. The vagina has double organs, the upper part from the uterine canal, from the fused of the right and the left of the paramesonephric duct. The lower part of the vagina derived from the urogenital sinuses. The pelvic part of the urogenital cavity is separated from the vaginal cavity by a thin tissue plate is called the hymen, which is derived from the epithelial of both these structures. The hymen, thin tissue plate, derived from the epithelial of the both structures. Remnant cranial and caudal mesonephric excretory tubules may be forming the vestiges of the apophorin and paraphorin inside the mesoovarium. The mesoovarium covered the ovary and connecting with the board ligament. Remnant cranial mesonephric duct seen in the apophorin, while the caudally mesonephric duct seen in the wall vagina or uterus as the Gartner cyst, Gartner cyst forming or locations in the intralateral vaginal wall. And these tables show the list the derived of the mesonephric tubules, mesonephric duct, and the paramesonephric duct in the male and the female. Mesonephric tubules in the males forming to the afferent ductules and the appendix of the epididymis, while in the female forming the apophorin and the paraphorin. While the mesonephric duct in the male, the urethric bud forming the collecting systems of the kidney, and the epididymis ductus different seminal vesicles and ejaculatory ducts. while الurethric buds also in the female forming the collecting systems of the kidney and Gartner's duct or cyst. Paramesonephric duct in the male forming the appendix of the testis and the prostatic utricle, while in the female forming the uterine tube, the uterus will upper to a third of the vagina. Now, the clinical correlates uterine and vaginal defects. First, duplications of the uterus. It may be result from the abnormality in the effusions of the paramesonephric ducts at the uterine canal. These anomalies may be of in many types. May be complete. Is called the uterus didelphysed with a double vagina, or indent uterus, or is called the uterus arcutus مقوس يصير أو مسنن. Two uterine horn and one vagina is called the uterus bicornus, or maybe atresia of the paramesonephric duct resulting in uterus bicorns with rudimentary horn, or atresia of the uterine cervix. Or abnormal sino-vaginal bulbus that may be result in the double vagina or atresia of the vagina. Thanks.